a kind of political sentimentalism comes about as romantic emotionalism meets realism's uh, reform impetus, and is wrapped together with the emotion, the ambition, the social ambition of the Victorian era in Britain. And one of the more interesting, for a couple of different reasons, one of the more interesting exponents of this is comes from Ireland, where Lady Jane Wilde takes up her pen. She is uh, she's an upper middle class daughter of a comfortable family and Protestant family living in Ireland, but she becomes enamored of Irish nationalist politics, and she takes up their cause. In the middle of the 1800s, the most prominent cause was starvation. The Irish potato famine was just decimating the entire population, and so she wrote about it in a couple of significant lyrics. The first one, let's say, is a lament for the potato, and she took this from an existing source. She had to translate it essentially from Gaelic. It was originally in the original Irish language. And she updated it into English so that it could be more widespread, with the express purpose of exposing the crisis. The people were starving, and this was something she was looking to shed some light on. And the poem that she offers wraps up that kind of emotional political stridency with the nationalism, which is only infused all the more, strengthened all the more by the association of this lyric with Gaelic, with the Irish language. The Irish language was the celebration of the Irish language is a considerable theme in the Irish nationalist movement, which is fostered by the Catholics in there, who were looking to link back to even pre-Catholic age, to the Druids and the Gaelics. And it was a very potent mix for quite some time in British politics and sociological surveys. But A Lament for the Potato, not a complicated poem, but interesting in its earnestness. There is woe, there is clamor in our desolated land, and wailing lamentation from a famine-stricken band. And weeping are the multitudes in sorrow and despair for the green fields of Munster, lying desolate and bare. Woe for Lorc's ancient kingdom, sunk in slavery and grief. Plundered, ruined are our gentry, our people and their chief. For the harvest lieth scattered, more worth to us than gold, for all the kindly food that nourished both the young and the old. Well I mind me of the co-sharings where princes might dine, and we drank until nightfall the best 7 sorts of wine. Yet was ever the potato our old familiar dish, and the best of all sauces with the beeves and the fish. But the heart now is silent, no one careth for the sound. No flowers, no sweet honey, and no beauty can be found. Not a bird its weeping, its music thrilling through the leaves of the wood, not but weeping and hands wringing in despair for our food. And the heavens all in darkness seem lamenting our gloom, no brightness in the sunlight, not a ray to pierce the gloom. The cataract comes rushing with a fearful deepened roar, and ocean bursts its boundaries, dashing wildly on the shore. Yet in misery and want we have one protecting man, kindly Barry of Fitzstephen's old hospitable clan. by mount and river, working deeds of charity and grace, blessings ever on our champion, best hero of his race. God, save us, God, in thy mercy bend to hear the people's cry from the famine-stricken fields rising bitterly on high. Let the mourning and the clamor cease in Lork's ancient land, and shield us from the death hour by thy strong protecting hand. Couple of things jump out here. Obviously, there is a sing-song equality to it, that very forced rhyme, one after the other, one line after the other. It is essentially, it's declamatory. It is a song in essence. It's thundering down its outrage, and all this feels very romantic. Also, the references to Lork, the ancient kingdom, that sense of the archaic past to which all romanticism and especially the nationalism within it appeals. Why can't we just get back to the way things were before all of this fancy complication, before all this civilization? Civilization would be very English. They wanted the primitivism of good Irish values. And you can see this leading through there. The even by then, very artificially antiquated language doing there. You know, there is woe, seems a little old-fashioned even for the Victorian era. You know, thy strong protecting hand, thy, that's already, again, very archaic, not particularly she's going for a feel. She's going for a style that would feel old-fashioned in the good old-fashioned Irish way. And it makes that appeal on those grounds. It's trying very hard to seem ancient and a tie to the past. And it is a tie to an earlier past. She was writing from a source that was like 100 years old. So, you know, there's something there. It's going back a little bit, not quite, you know, it's not quite runic temples or anything, but it's something. And you can see where the poem is going in that direction and trying to reach that pitch in very superficial ways. But it is at the same time giving a needed voice to the issue. People were starving. The potato famine was real, and she was trying to call some attention to it. So give her some credit for that. She is using her poetic voice to give a voice to the voiceless, if you will. It's got that class-based thing again, you know, referencing, you know, the common people that are so valued versus the gentry, and there's a little bit of a question there. And of course, over all of this is hanging the idea of English imperialism and the heavy foot of the crown on Ireland's natural rights. She is reaching for all of this and packaging it together in what is a very catchy little tune as it goes along, and appeals on that so that she can't be considered too radical, so that she so that all of this Irish nationalism stuff, which whoa, that's for crazy, you know, hippies and stuff, she does leave that note at the end of an appeal to God, you know. Save us, God, in thy mercy bend to hear the people's cry from the famine-stricken fields raising bitterly on high. You know, shield us from the death hour up by thy strong protecting hand. So it's ending on the high note of referencing God. So anybody who's going to be too quick to dispel all this as, that's just a lot of radical stuff, that conservative perspective would be very much attracted by or receptive to. It's like, well, okay, she's leaving off on God, so that's good for me. There's some subtle dynamics going on there. She's clearly couching her rhetoric very carefully. And the other interesting poem that we have from her is The Exodus, which is about, well, when you had the famine, what you get is a lot of people leaving. Huge numbers of people were just getting out of Ireland. Many, if not most of them, trucking off to the New York and Boston seaports because anything was better. They would land here, and there was all sorts of restrictions against them, and the laws were outraged that we were being invaded by these hordes of pale people. I don't know. But the Irish were hugely discriminated against in the 1800s. They were the invading hordes. But from Ireland's perspective, they were all leaving, not coming. So there's that angle of it to consider. The Exodus, 1,000,000 a decade, calmly and cold, the units are read by our statesmen sage. Little they think of a nation old, fading away from history's page. Outcast weeds by a desolate sea, fallen leaves of humanity. 1,000,000 a decade of human wrecks, corpses lying in fever sheds, corpses huddled on foundering decks, and shroudless dead on their rocky beds. Nerve and muscle and heart and brain, lost to Ireland, lost in vain. 1,000,000 a decade, count 10 by 10, column and line of the record fair. Each unit stands for 10,000 men, staring with blank, dead eyeballs there. Strewn like blasted trees on the sod, men that were made in the image of God. 1,000,000 a decade, and nothing done. The Caesars had less to conquer a world, and the war for the right not yet begun. The banner of freedom not yet unfurled. The soil is fed by the weed that dies. If forest leaves fall, yet they fertilize. But ye, dead, not climbing the height, not clearing a path for the future to tread, not opening the golden portals of light, ere the gate was choked by your piled up dead. Martyrs ye, never a name shines on the golden roll of fame. Had ye rent one jive of the festering chain, strangled the life of a nation's soul, poured your lifeblood by river and plain, yet touched with your dead hands freedom's goal. Left of heroes one footprint more on our soil, though stamped in your core. We could triumph while mourning the brave, dead for all that was holy and just, and right through our tears on the grave, as we flung down the dust to dust. They died for their country, but led her up from the sleep of the dead. 1,000,000 a decade, what does that mean? A nation dying of inner decay, the churchyard silence where life has been, the base of the pyramid crumbling away, a drift of men gone over the sea, a drift of the dead where men should be. Was it for this ye plighted your word, crowned and crownless rulers of men? Have ye kept faith with your crucified Lord, and fed his sheep till he comes again? Or fled like hireling shepherds away, leaving the fold the gaunt wolf's prey? Have ye given of your purple to cover? Have ye given of your gold to cheer? Have ye given of your love as a lover might cherish the bride he held dear? Broken the sacrament bread to feed the souls and bodies in uttermost need. Ye stand at the judgment bar today. The angels are counting the dead roll too. Have ye trod in the pure, perfect way and ruled for God as the crown should do? Count our dead before angels and men. You're judged and doomed by the statist's pen. Not subtle. Very forceful, very strong, very angry. You can sense the outrage coming through that very steady, steady, steady meter. She's still leaning on the archaisms of ye, have ye given, is very old-fashioned even then. The repetition, a million a decade, a million a decade. These are those who died and left. Ireland was just hemorrhaging people, and the exact people that you would want to stay and try and rebuild the nation, the young and the strong. Everybody else was left, and there's not much that you can do with that as a nation. The vibrancy comes especially from the portraits. From the more detail you get, the more important I would say that this poem is, because it gives a nice portrait of the people and their plight as they leave. Corpses lying in fever sheds, corpses huddled on foundering decks, and shroudless dead on their rocky beds, nerve and muscle, heart and brain, lost to Ireland but in vain. The sense of, the poor and huddled masses as they were, basically being driven out by fate. That's a crisp image. Where it doesn't quite get to is anything particularly more specific, and this is kind of significant. There are no, it's not that detailed. You don't get that close to the people who are actually suffering. Lady Jane Wilde, relatively removed from all of this by socioeconomic circumstances, she gave her life to this cause. She gave her life to Ireland, and she died fairly poor. But there is a sense of some objectification, some detachment. Some critics might even say a little exploitation. She is coming in, essentially, the limousine liberal, if you will, parachuting in and taking stock of the situation around her, and without necessarily showing that she is part of it, she is just scanning around, taking notes, and objectifying all of it. She is othering, let's say, perhaps even orientalizing the poor in this plight. There is that uncomfortable feeling of it. Now, that is unfair to level at anyone. There's no indication that she was anything but a very sincere advocate for this cause. But the poetry itself does have that sense of remove, does have that sense of Victorian distance. There's for all of the heat of the passion, there is a somewhat cold objectification of the subject itself. But for that, it does paint a very compelling image, the thundering and repetition of a million a decade, conflating the numbers of the people who leave with the people who die. That drives home an image of the scope of this problem, and that's kind of the point. That's what she's driving for here, I would say, or at least that's what the poem is driving for. It does end once again on that image of religiosity, the image of God, or at least it drives towards that, but it does make a direct appeal to the people in charge, to the English government, to do something to alleviate this problem. This is the era of governmental reform in England. They're doing lots of things to try and alleviate problems for the poor, corn laws and whatever, which has highly complicated results that we don't need to go into. But this is the spirit of the age, a kind of social do-gooderism is how it was kind of derided, but the idea that let's get in there and try and help this. And that's kind of where she leaves off with, count our dead before angels and men. You're judged and doomed by the statist's pen. The statist is a statistician, essentially, working for the government, who is keeping records of all of this. And from her perspective, the people, the government officials who can be helping will be simply judged on that numerical basis as to whether or not their numbers of dead and, fled continue to rise or fall. And in her perspective, it's a simple up or down vote. And she is appealing very directly to those people in government who have gotten so used to addressing legislation and social policy to social needs for specific groups. She is saying the eyes of the world and of history are watching you, and you might think that you've got a pretty good record, but maybe you're overlooking this one category: Ireland. She is a very interesting woman. She's a very passionate woman. You can see that coming out through her work. She did die in poverty. She did try and she was working for the cause throughout her life. And probably the most interesting little factoid footnote about her comes in her progeny. She leaves us not just the poems, as writers do, but she left us her son. Her young son Oscar went on to some notoriety that makes Lady Jane Wilde more than just your average poet.